Escapism. The tendency to seek distraction and relief from unpleasant realities, especially by seeking entertainment or engaging in fantasy. For example, like taking the time of your day and enjoying the scenery of Mount Fuji, the largest mountain in Japan, one of the three holy mountains that is recognized as a symbol of Japan, a scenic display of majestic beauty, an inspiration for artists and poets, one of Mother Nature's most proudest accomplishments that would attract adventurers and sightseers throughout the world. But for one girl, Yui, Mount Fuji was a rare moment of peace and tranquility, where every day after school, Yui would find herself a nice spot to sit down on, usually near a tree at the local park, and spend all day just sitting there, staring at the mountain. The sight of it had given Yui a blissful experience of freshness. Sometimes, when she could even feel the cool breeze rub against her skin, it was a feeling of freshness and being new. And even though many of us would see this as a free luxury, for Yui, this was something more. It was hope, a taste of freedom, and sensation of enlightenment. Mount Fuji is the most valuable thing that Yui has right now. It's utterly the perfect example of escapism. Because pretty soon, we are going to find out why Yui has an overwhelming dread of going home when she finds herself embracing these blissful moments. So, while we enjoy these few seconds of serenity, I'm going to share something. My friends, I'm not here to bless you with a horror story. I'm not looking to scare you. Today's show, I'm here to make you feel very uncomfortable. I'm going to share you a story that's going to disgust you. To have that wonderful experience of human filthiness. Enjoy the show. Welcome to the Dharma Barbecue Restaurant. A small restaurant that has a struggling reputation for its unsanitary presence and appraised for its magnificent meat. The kind of restaurant for those who are daring enough to try new foods and even barbecue lovers who can tolerate the dirty surroundings. It's the second floor of this restaurant where Yui resides in, and much like the restaurant's gloomy presence, the interior of this home was no different. The place was a byproduct of grimy filth. Because of the terrible ventilation, the greasy air would find itself seeping onto the second floor and coating the walls with its layer of yellowish grease. Actually, everything within the home was coated with grease, from the walls to the ceiling, all the way down to the furniture itself. Since Yui's mother had left, there was never any cleaning that was done. The futons, the blankets, even the clothing would be stained and sticky. Even if they were sent to the laundry down the street, it wouldn't matter, seeing how it wasn't more than a single hour before they got stained again. Meet the father of this world of gloom, and owner of the controversial Dharma Barbecue. A man who has long neglected his hygienic appearance and even came to accept his oily presence that reeked of stale barbecue and foul body odor. Pretty much you can think of him as nothing more but a miserable human being whose life has been confined to a restaurant that's doomed for failure. For our next member of this struggling family is little Garo, a vile and malicious child who not only has a twisted form of entertainment by abusing and tormenting his younger sister, but has this strange fixation with drinking salad oil. Most of the time, when nobody's looking, you can find him crouching underneath the kitchen sink, gulping the stuff like it was soda. Then there's Yui, the poor girl who's now grown into having a sensitivity for her greasy shelter. Living like this since her mother left, Yui had finally come to hate it. how she hated her greased-up bully of a brother and her depressing father, who had spent his days and nights tending to a failing restaurant. Saturation levels at 50%. A mental recognition of the density within the air. A small talent that dwells within Yui's thoughts, where she can detect the amount of oil that lingers within the air. And catching her brother trying to finish off another bottle of salad oil, she could feel the saturation levels slowly approaching 60%. Puberty. The moment when adolescents reach that certain age of maturity. But for Garo, it was an age where his life was now stepping into a teenage nightmare when he had finally gotten his collection of beauty marks, where his curious experimentation upon these facial marks would be greeted by a sensitive and yet sharp, stinging pain, as he would relieve himself from the small stream of thick pus. It wasn't long before his entire face would be covered. Life at school had become a miserable hell for Garo, having all the pretty girls laughing at him in his hideous face, constantly hounded by the words freak or pimple face, fucking crater face, even becoming a constant target for relentless bullies. Life for Garo was like becoming an example of why God would have a sick sense of humor, where his misery had become the morbid entertainment for other people. And even with his sister witnessing the torment from a distance, not knowing how to share her support, had infected Garo with the delusional idea that his own sister was enjoying the torment, that she too had thought of him as a freak, something to laugh at. Because of that misunderstanding, which was more like a delusional excuse, later that day, Yui had found herself being viciously attacked by her brother. After everything Garo had done to her, the teasing, the abuse, pulling the hair, it must have felt good for Yui when seeing Garo getting his share of torment. According to Garo, that's what Yui must have had on her mind when she watched her brother being beaten and stepped on by the other kids in school. But with Garo's smelly father trying to stop his son from assaulting Yui, the meddling fool, who never knew nor cared that this was all his fault. His own son, who's now a freak, contaminated by his filthy fucking grease, all because of a dying restaurant. Garo's father was a failure who lingered on a dream that sent his life into the shitter. An old man who didn't know how to run a restaurant, who couldn't manage enough money to even fix the ventilation, who couldn't even keep a steady marriage because of the hopeless expectations that he has for this sorry excuse of a restaurant. Garo's father knew that this was all his fault, and yet the failure was too coward to man up to the greasy pit that they live in. When the fight between Garo and his father had finally ended, all that remained was the remnants of a man who had once dreamed of running a successful business, owner of a highly successful restaurant, while growing a happy family. What Yui was now looking at was a foolish old man who had just now woken up and realized what kind of world he was in, that his dreams of success had become an unbearable nightmare, a shell of a man who had the inner desire, the urgency to shed a tear of shame, but wiping the greasy sweat from his face before his skin would be instantly coated with the greasy sweat, slowly dripping from his face to the tip of his nose. That was when Yui's father had come to understand the inevitable future. After that dreadful day, Garo had stopped going to school, and had pretty much overtaken the entire house because of how his father had come to fear his son and his violent behavior. Now, with his father lacking the fortitude, the enthusiasm to bring an end to Garo's unwanting behavior, his strange addiction with drinking salad and cooking oil had dramatically increased. It was every day where Garo would be holed up in his room, chugging bottles and even buckets of oil, not only gaining weight with his repulsive diet, but his entire face was now covered with abnormal pustules. Garo was an unbearable sight to look at. If you had the stomach to even look at him longer than 30 seconds, you could even see some of the white pus trying to emerge from the small swelling boils that had decorated his face. For Yui, life had become more miserable as the abuse and torment increased, forced into living under her brother's unhealthy and malicious lifestyle, reluctantly following every demand by fetching more salad oil, blankets, and futons, while taking every blunt insult that's thrown her way. And just as Yui had thought that things could not get any worse, it was on one day, during one of Garo's violent tantrums, watching him clench his hideous face within a fit of rage, where Yui would be disgusted by the small streams of pus that were injected from her brother's face. And when Garo had watched Yui's disgust with the small splashes of foreign pus that had struck her on the arm and face, had given Garo a hesitant pause of disbelief, slowly convincing himself that his own sister had found his greasy body gross. A delusional thought that would be relieved with the dreadful idea, why not teach his sister how gross he can truly be? Why not give her a taste? Forcing Yui into the ground, giving her a front row seat of Garo's idea of a horror show. It was when Yui would see Garo's face being swallowed by a swarm of small boils between his two hands that were clasping his entire face. And that was when it happened, where Critter Face had finally erupted and showered the helpless Yui with the small streams of greasy pus. The sight that had frozen Yui with utter disgust and horror as she would feel the thick fluids of warming grease covering her face before she would feel Garo's hands around her throat, denying her the ability to even breathe in the filthy air. Humiliated and petrified as Yui had tried grasping for air, overhearing Garo's murderous rants of wanting to be remembered as the most foulest villain, wanting to burn in the deepest pits of hell, burnt into a black, greasy smoke that everybody in hell can have something to choke on. Everybody has to die, and what better way to kick it off than snuffing out Yui? It was instant and unexpected, where Garo's murderous intent was interrupted by his useless father, striking his son across the head with a metal frying pan, standing over Garo's lifeless body, becoming a scene where his failing and hopeless life would evolve into something unthinkable. May God forgive this hopeless father for killing his malicious son, and for what he's about to do. The following week, the Dharma barbecue had mysteriously exhausted itself of its popular trademark meat and replaced with a new and strange meat, proudly served to every guest who would dare enter the doors of this filthy, greasy restaurant. Saturation levels now reaching 70%. The air was becoming more dense. The levels of heat had begun to rise, and that was when the strange dreams had begun infecting Yui's mind. It would begin with Yui's moment of escapism, standing before the beautiful sight of Mount Fuji. Except this time, Yui's body was not greeted by the cool air, no feelings of freshness or bliss. Instead was the overwhelming sensation of uncomfortable heat, the stench of foulness that had lingered within the air, and like an oversized pustule that had infected the earth itself, Mount Fuji, a scenery of beauty, had suddenly given a volcanic eruption, as the skies would be filled with its revolting sludge and engulfing the town below within a wave of grease, giving her the experience of drowning within the sea of grease as she would be swept away by the wave. When the wave had settled, literally every street, every building, car, tree, and living creature within the town would be covered with a thickened layer of yellowish grease. A revolting sight that had not only caused her to lose her appetite, but had given her a painful sickness when she would be awakened from this dream. Even though it had become difficult for Yui to find any sleep because of the heat and the grease, every time she would always have these nightmares, vivid and realistic. It's because of them nightmares, Yui had never felt the same feelings of peace and freshness when she would look at Mount Fuji. Saturation levels at 80%. It said that the face was supposed to be the most dirtiest part of the human body. Anyways, it was sometime after her father's business was hanging on a thread. It didn't take long before Yui had found herself being infected with her own set of abnormal beauty marks. Before she even knew it, her entire face would be covered. Much like her brother, Yui had also become a shameful freak that would isolate herself from the outside world, confined within her own greasy prison. She had also found herself sharing the same feelings of anger towards her useless father, blaming the old fool for this miserable suffering. It was during one of Yui's nightmares, when she had found herself stepping further into the filthy torment that dwelled within the pit of her mind, when going through the experience of drowning when being engulfed by a wave of grease, an awful experience that would have her waking up to her father, forcing her into drinking a bottle of cooking oil. Till this day, Yui will never forget the expression he had, a desperate tendency, that behind this image of urgency was something sinister that was pleading for Yui to drink the oil. A man who was obsessed with a delusional sickness before Yui would bring her father back into reality after smacking the bottle of oil from her father's hand. Waking up to a bottle of salad oil being shoved down your throat definitely makes you wonder what the hell is going on with Yui's father. Until you start connecting the dots between little Garo and his father's horrible way of keeping the restaurant supplied with meat. Obviously, Yui's father had played dumb, a spineless fool who had kept his devious intent behind the excuse of wanting to help Yui with their troubles. That this misunderstanding of assuming that she had a craving for salad oil was no big deal. A loving father who had thought that his sickened and saddened daughter was hungry. This whole time, the nightmares, the feelings of nausea, loss of appetite, the painful sickness, the stinging boils on her face. How long has her father been doing this? Trying to make her into like Garo. Since that night, Yui had never slept. Instead, she would force herself awake throughout the long nights, watching her father trying to sneak into her room every hour or two. It was only a couple days later before the restaurant had stopped seeing any customers. With the supply of meat running out, her father swimming in debt, and the restaurant being hounded with complaints because of how customers were hospitalized after Yui's father began serving customers with this new and strange meat. Eventually, the man had given up on involving Yui within this horrible scheme and began drinking the salad oil himself. Saturation levels have now reached above 90%. The Dharma barbecue had finally closed its doors, and yet the saturation levels had never dropped. In fact, it had dramatically increased. As a result, Yui's father had now become nothing but a pathetic man who had lived his days in depression. His life was now at rock bottom. His body temperature had risen. The aged body odor that had been lingering around him had begun filling and staining the house. Even the saturation levels had increased because of his body heat. The man was now dripping with a constant flow of greasy sweat. The house was like living in a steam bath. Breathing the foul air had become difficult. The heat was relentless. The odor had even grown so vile that it had given Yui a feeling of her insides being soured and rotted, sometimes sending a sharp pain through her chest. Saturation levels now at 93%. The walls were not only caked with a thick layer of grease, giving a constant flow of dripping fluids because of the heat. Even the grease that was coming from the ceiling had made it look like it was raining within the house. It was like a slow rain that had lingered over Yui. Saturation levels now at 95%. Because of how the air was so dense, it had even contaminated the water, instantly giving a thick film of grease before turning into sludge. You could not even drink a glass of water without having it being filled with grease. Saturation levels now at 97%. The futon, the furniture, every clothing were now ruined, drenched from all the grease that was absorbed. Saturation levels now at 98%. So right now, I bet you're asking yourself, why doesn't Yui just leave this nightmarish hell? Why continue on putting herself through this torment? And to be honest, I really don't know. There are just some people in this world who choose to do things that make absolutely no sense. And of course, I know better than to question something that may have its own set of reasons, personal reasons. But the one question that I'm more interested in is, what did it take for Yui to finally leave this greasy hell? It was on one night when overhearing the familiar sounds of her father chopping. A very strange sound to be filling the greasy house, seeing how the restaurant was closed and that there was no more meat. A very curious sound that had Yui descending to the lower part of the building, step into the restaurant, reluctantly peer into the back kitchen, and come upon the scene that had finally convinced her to leave the house. Standing before Yui was her father, performing his last attempt on saving the restaurant by chopping on a foot, cutting it into finer pieces. It was his own foot. Till this very day, Yui had never forgotten the brownish sludge that was slowly coming from her father's missing leg. My God. Well, I bet we're hungry for some tasty barbecue right now. Thinking about enjoying a nice, greasy meal during a hot summer day. Anyways, my friends, I thank you dearly for helping me reach my quota with my last video. And I hope you enjoyed today's show, or found it traumatizing and uncomfortable. For those who like to share a little love and help me with what I do on here, you can visit me on my Patreon with the link below. If you want to be friends, you have a desperate question for me, or a curiosity, or you just want to stalk me, you can visit me on my Twitter, also with the link below. Until next time, my friends, thank you for watching the show.